Hello, everyone. My name is Mega Subramaniam, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Maryland. And today I will be co-presenting with three youth librarians who are currently pursuing a brand new one-year online certificate program at the University of Maryland. The certificate program is called Youth Experience. Um, you can check out our website at yx.umd.edu. I will introduce all of them shortly, but before that, today we will be talking about transforming teen services, the future of the past. So I'll give you a little bit of background and then I'll introduce you to the speakers that are going to present today. So about 2 years ago, I assessed the current preparedness of librarians to promote 21st century skills and learning among youth by going through a couple of reports that you can see on the screen, on the slide in front of you. This includes the Futures Report that was produced by YALSA, the Arab Report, and then the Re-envisioning the MLIS report, which came out of the University of Maryland, and a series of peer reports on library use, and found that there are four categories of interrelated knowledge and skill sets that emerged in this report, describing the nature of skills and abilities that librarians must have to promote learning and also to promote innovation among youth. So we at the University of Maryland really decided to focus on these four emerging categories of interrelated knowledge, and that's what is covered in the YX certificate program. And we'll be talking about the skills that are needed for future librarians, the four interrelated skill set that we are going to talk about today in today's presentation. So the first one is working with non-dominant youth. So librarians need to know how to work with youth from non-dominant backgrounds who needs libraries the most. So non-dominant background are actually youth who are defined as members of diverse cultural groups that have traditionally been excluded from access to learning. And that includes because of their race, because of their ethnicity, because of gender, because of home situation, could be socioeconomic status, technology access, literacy, and the list of characteristics actually goes on and on. So take note, though, that a non-dominant group of youth for one community may be different from another community. So a non-dominant youth could also be the group of youth that do not come to your library or could not come to your library, but these are the youth that really need the library the most. So this is the first set of skills that we'll be talking about today, how to work with non-dominant youth. The second set of skills that we would like to highlight in this presentation is how can librarians transition from the expert role to the facilitator role. So librarians really need to be ready and willing to transition from this expert to facilitator. And what they do as a facilitator is engage in active and continuous learning with teens and for teens. The third set of knowledge is developing dynamic community partnerships. So librarians need to develop dynamic community partnerships that reach beyond the library. So we should be going out and talking to people in the community that can contribute to the library and also to the youth community that is in our state or in our town. Last but not least is how do we demonstrate impact of teens programs and services. So librarians need to be able to demonstrate the impact of their programs and skills on youth, especially in the development of 21st century skills. So we'll talk about this as well. So in summary, today, in the next 45 minutes or so, we'll be sharing the future of the past with you. So what do we learn? What do we want to learn from the past that will determine the future? So the presentation will answer the following questions that you see on the slide. First, the non-dominant youth set of skills that I mentioned earlier. Who are we talking to? Are we aware of how to engage teams who are non-dominant? And how are we aware of our teams, our community, and their needs? So this section here will be presented by Rachel MacDonald. Rachel is a Teen Services Librarian for King County Library System from the state of Washington. The second question that we will cover is, how do we create an opportunity for growth and learning when we are not an expert? So this is the transitioning our role from an expert to a facilitator. So this set of skills will be covered by Jennifer Ilardi. Jennifer is a Youth Services Librarian at St. Louis County Library from the state of Missouri. And then we'll proceed to who do we partner with and how does the partnership help achieve our goal for learning for youth. And this is the community partnership set of skills that I mentioned earlier. And this will be covered by Shannon Lake. Shannon is a teen educator librarian at Providence Public Library in Rhode Island. And then how do we know what we have created is working? This is the evaluation piece, evaluation set of skills, and I will talk about this towards the end. So for each set of knowledge, we'll briefly share what we have done in the past, as in the library community, what we have done in the past, or what we are currently doing in reality. And we want to bring up what are the problems with these approaches that we have used in the past or we are currently doing. And then what can or should we do now or as we move forward? What can we do? And what are the skill sets that a librarian should have in order to be able to do this quote-unquote future type of practices that we are talking about today. Take note, though, that we are here merely to start the conversation. So we have selected some examples very carefully to stimulate the discussion. And we really don't want to overwhelm you with every possible sub-skill and knowledge that teen librarians must have. So we're really trying to give you a broader overview of the set of knowledge and skills that teen librarians must have. All right, so we will be moving along to the first set of skills, working with non-dominant youth, and Rachel will be covering that.
Thank you, Mega. So according to a recent study by the Pew Research Center, 14% of the U.S. population is now foreign-born, compared to just 5% in 1965. And by 2055, the U.S. will not have a single racial or ethnic majority. I bring this up because that's partly what my community already looks like. This is a picture that was taken fairly recently within my library. And as library staff, we need to recognize the unique assets and challenges faced by non-dominant youth, which include youth of color, youth with disabilities, and LGBTQI youth. So what have our services traditionally looked like in serving non-dominant youth? In the past, libraries have spent much of their effort programming for youth who already use the library. However, as we may know, there are a variety of barriers that keep all youth in our communities from using libraries. These may include the youth perception of libraries. They may include library policies, transportation, language barriers. There's a variety of other things that may keep youth from using the libraries. And whether we're aware of it or not, we also all hold implicit biases, and these inform our view of the world and people with backgrounds that are different from our own. Our profession is very white, fairly middle class, also cisgender, and our assumptions and attitudes towards people from marginalized group may be destructive and paternalistic. And without taking the time to examine our beliefs and actively work to change them, we're going to have trouble serving all of our patrons in an equitable manner. So as individuals and organizations, that's our goal. But without training and partnerships, we may not know how to proceed. So on this next slide here, I have what's called the continuum of cultural competence. So on the left-hand side, you see destructiveness, incapacity, cultural blindness. This is statements like, I don't see color, or I treat all people the same. And then moving towards the right-hand side, you see the ideas of pre-competence, being aware of cultural differences, competence, and finally, proficiency. I'm going to say here that these are moving targets. You don't get to check a box after one training or even 20 trainings and say that you're culturally competent or culturally proficient. It's a goal that we should be constantly working towards. So our goal as librarians and institutions should be not only to be aware of and respect differences, but also to consider how people's belief systems and practices affect how patrons interact with our staff, with our space, and with our resources. Ideally, we should always be expanding our knowledge of different cultures and adapt our interactions accordingly. So this could come in many different forms, self-assessment and reflection, looking at community demographics and trends. This could be formal learning, informal conversations, but the end goal should always be to advocate for library services and policies that truly serve all of our youth, not just the ones who are walking through our doors on a regular basis. And especially non-dominant youth who, as we know, face challenges related to education, employment, etc. And as I mentioned before, this is a work in progress, not a destination. So what does our practice of the future look like? One of the best ways to serve non-dominant youth, in my opinion, is to go to where they already are. So in addition to forming partnerships with schools, libraries should work with community groups, and this includes nonprofits, parent or caregiver groups, grassroots associations that serve specific groups of youth. At a previous library that I worked at, I partnered with an organization called Proud Out Wonderful, which was a support group run by a local mental health organization for GLBTQ youth and allies. And in my current position, I work very closely with the International Rescue Committee, a refugee resettlement agency nearby. So my coworkers and I are in constant contact with their youth serving staff. We share information, we share resources, we collaborate on services such as personalized library tours for brand new students, summer school that they run, and STEM programs as part of their annual summer camp. And I should add that this is just a blast to be working with this group. So on the next slide here, I have a picture that likely many of you are familiar with, a connected learning image. So we need to leverage connected learning to engage with non-dominant youth, allowing them to pursue their interests with the support of library staff, their peers, and mentors, and that will enable us to engage and serve more inside and outside of our building. We'll also want to offer a variety of different program formats and models. So in some communities, you may be able to have a regular weekly program, a book group where everybody reads the same book, for instance. In other communities, such as mine, because of, challenges with transportation, with children who are caring for younger children, with a variety of reading levels even. Those aren't programs that are going to work. So really knowing what students in your community are going to respond to, what youth in your community are looking for is very important. And not being afraid to switch up what you're doing and when you're offering it. So in working with non-dominant youth, some of the skills of the future that are incredibly important are cultural competence, facilitation skills, which Jennifer's going to be talking about next, collaboration, and finally, coalition building. So working with those institutions in your community to build larger programs for youth and initiatives for youth. So I'm going to talk just briefly about youth voice. And on this slide, on the right-hand side, there is the image of a publication, a book that YALSA put out last year called Putting Teens First in Library Services, a Roadmap. And I pulled this quote from Juan Rubio because I think it really illustrates the importance of youth voice. In this case, we're talking about the context of media creation, but I think it extends to all of the things that we want our youth to learn and to be able to use as adults. So in the past, libraries have solicited youth voice. However, that feedback was largely gathered through formalized groups such as teen advisory boards, sometimes through informal mechanisms such as conversations, maybe a survey or two, especially in summer reading programs. But that's not enough. We know we're not reaching all of our youth in that case. So what should the service of the future look like? Well, we need to be gathering feedback from teens both inside and outside the library. And we also want to work with youth to co-design youth-led and youth-facilitated programs, which is actually something that we're talking a great deal about right now in the YX program that I'm involved in. And finally, I have a vision in my head that we involve youth in developing policies that directly affect them, such as the Library Code of Conduct policy. So what are the skills of the future for youth voice? We want to be able to assess library programs and services for how they enable youth voice. We want to be aware that we're not using youth as tokens or soliciting their feedback and then actually not doing anything with it, but that we're truly equal partners. There's a variety of participatory design methods that can be used to promote youth voice, and there's a lot of articles out there, training out there that you can engage in to learn more about that. And finally, we need to be able to advocate for why youth voice is integral to successful library services. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm so excited to be able to talk to you guys about how you don't have to be an expert with everything. You don't have to know everything about everything in order to be able to bring things to your community. So we're transitioning from being an expert to actually just being a facilitator. And one of the phrases that always sticks with me is changing from being the sage on the stage to the guide on the side and being able to help out people who want to learn new things. So the practice of the past is that we've oftentimes done just library-driven programs, things that we really want people to be able to know, and we're like, here, you should know this, take that, do with it what you want. And then if we don't know it, then we don't use it. And we're like, oh, well, I really don't know how to do technology-driven programs, so I'm just going to go ahead and not do that. So it's great that you follow your passions and you do things and you contribute to the programs that you're being able to offer to your patrons, but sometimes your patrons want something different and you want to know what it is that your students are interested in, and you want to help facilitate that. And so there's a couple of different ways that we might be able to try to do that, and that I'll get into that a little bit more later. So Practices of the Future is about creating an environment to help teens design programs and hone problem-solving skills. So if teens really want to see something happen, then maybe we should become more of a helpful guide to be able to help them create what it is that they want to see in the world. And then when we have teen volunteer work, it's really great to be able to look to those teens that are already interested, that are already invested, and being able to help them or to listen to them a little bit more to create more programs that are teen driven. I am not a teen. And I'm not interested in teen things as far as like my own personal life is concerned. So being able to look to those teens to be able to help them accomplish what it is that they want to achieve or that what they want to see happen is something that's really cool that we're able to help them do. And teens are experts in teen culture. Again, I said I'm not a teen, so being able to use them to help to empower them to help other teens, I think is a really awesome capacity that we have as being librarians in our communities. So skills of the future. I think one of the things that we could really do is learn design thinking skills. And I'll talk about that a little bit more now. So design thinking skills. There's a lot of different ways that we can look at design thinking. There's lots of different stuff about it. As I learned through the YX program, there's so many different philosophers and researchers that look at design thinking in multiple different ways. But this is one of my favorite things because it is an infinity symbol. And we do have to go through this process over and over and over again. So we empathize. We think about who are we talking to? What does our community look like? What is it that they're interested in? And we define that. We say, okay, well, what is it that they want from the community? What is it that they're trying to achieve? What resources can I tie in to being able to make them happy or to progress their learning and their thinking? Then we ideate. We come up with actual programs, actual game plans to say, okay, this is how we're going to attack this. This is what we're going to do. Then we prototype, we create these different programs, and then we test it. And then it all goes back around and around again. So we test it and we see, is this person, are the people who we have incorporated into our program planning, is that enough? Do we need different people? Do we need more people? Do we need different voices in order to be able to make it successful? And then we do the whole thing all over and over again. So one example is Mario Maker Camp, which is really cool to be able to observe. This Mario Maker Camp took place on a campus and on a college campus with different students to be able to participate, and they were between the ages of like 9 and 12. And what they had to do, what they were charged with, was being able to come up with like a 4-part world. So Super Mario Maker is a program that helps you to create your own Mario game. And then you can encourage other people to be able to play that game. And so at first, when the students got involved in it, all they did is they just did like this splatter paint type approach. They just created these undefeatable worlds where people couldn't actually get anywhere and achieve anything whatsoever. So the facilitator of that program was like, all right, let's break it down just a little bit, okay? So what I really want you guys to do is to create a tutorial. So in this tutorial, the students were encouraged to be able to help other people learn what you needed to do to tackle the other different worlds. So how to jump, how to spin, how to, how to attack, how to, kill your enemies and all that good stuff. And so then they were encouraged to develop an underground world. And in the underground world, it's a little bit different, but they had to stick with a theme. And then there was an auto scroll component to it, and then there was the ability to either choose an auto scroll world that was above ground or underwater, and then there's the boss level. So the facilitator didn't have to be an expert in everything that was going on. They just had to understand like the story structure or the idea that this is what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to teach kids how to design something for somebody else to be able to do or to engage with, and then the students were learning how to break things down to say, okay, well, in my tutorial, I need to create something that helps other students or participants to be able to actually engage in the world that I've created. And so it was really neat to be able to watch how the students were creating more of a storyline. They were breaking it down. It wasn't just about beating your friends or making something that was really terrible to engage with, but it was about designing something that students can engage with, and the facilitator of that program was helping those students understand how to do that. So again, like I said, they had to come up with their ideas. They had to define, they thought about who was going to be able to participate. They defined what was going on. The facilitator helped them with what they were supposed to be doing, from the tutorial to the underground to the auto scroll to the boss level. They had to design what they wanted to actually do. Are they going to jump from cloud to cloud, or are they going to be underwater? So they had to ideate. They had to figure it out. They had to prototype. And then when they tested it, it was so much fun. I got to test a couple of different games, and it was funny to be able to go through games where I was like, they gave me everything I needed to just fly over everything. I didn't have to engage in any different obstacle that they had created, but I was able to just, go through it. And as they watched me do that, they were like, all right, okay, I see where you are. Let me go ahead and change that. Let me go ahead and think about who's actually playing this game. Let me redefine what it is that I'm trying to do. Let me, come up with different ideas. Let me prototype it, and let's test it again. And so it was really cool to be able to watch that happen, both with the facilitator who created the program and with the students that were participating in the program in and of itself. But, they didn't have to be an expert. They just worked through this process in order to be able to decide what it was that needed to happen to get to their end goal, and then do it again. So one of the other things that I'm really excited about is that there was a Seattle Public Library, and they have a teen service learning project where they work with teens in order to be able to figure out what other programs that they're going to host at their library. So this is using teens as the experts and being able to use their interests, their strengths, and their desired strengths, which I think is really cool. Instead of saying like weaknesses, we always think of strengths and weaknesses in my experience. But to say like it's not a weakness, it's just a desired strength that I want to have to accomplish a different goal. So the skills of the future is being able to be a better facilitator, of putting the resources in the hands of the teens, of thinking of design thinking skills, and talking about how it's a continuous process. And like I said, there's many different ways to be able to think about design thinking, but that infinity symbol just sticks with me so hard because it is a continuous thing. Like you try something out and then something else needs to happen. So you need to reevaluate, who are you trying to reach? What are you trying to do? And who else can help with it? And let's try it out and evaluate it. And evaluation and being partners with other people is something that Mega and Shannon are going to talk about a little bit more. And if you're not an expert, you can find an expert. But working with that expert even and being able to figure out what program that you're going to be able to offer, how cool is that? Like just thinking that it's not going to end and that you're going to go through these processes of you're not the expert, but you're going through this process of being able to provide something that your community wants and needs because you've examined your community. So I'm going to turn it over to Shannon, who's going to talk a lot more about being an expert or finding your expert and creating partnerships.
Thank you, Jennifer. Great segue into developing dynamic community partnerships. Some of the past practices that we all are familiar with or might be familiar with is having community members come into the library asking you for space because they have a program that they want to present to the community. And then also when people say they want to partner, but it's not exactly a fair division of labor, sometimes people come with ideas into the library and they want you to do most of the work as the library, but yet it was their idea. A true partnership would not have this imbalance of division of labor. So let's move on to practices of the future. And in the future of library services, we want to move beyond just providing spaces for the community. It's okay to provide space, but there's also a way to partner with your community in addition to the space. And also, it's very important to let your strategic plan be your guide. Having a strong strategic plan within your organization is a way to help you figure out which partners you would like to work with and which partners maybe you should pursue, as well as relationship building. Instead of relationship building being considered an ad hoc to your work, it is actually part of your work. Making sure that you are embedded in your community, not only with your youth, but also with outside organizations, is very important in terms of being able to provide those dynamic programs for your youth and with your youth. Some of the skills for the future when developing dynamic community partnerships are prospecting and vetting your potential partners. So in the past, partners typically came to the library, but in the future, we should seek out who we want to work with. And part of this is being able to talk to other community members who may have worked with the person or organization in the past. So you can do a little bit of your homework and background research to figure out if they're also someone that you would want to work with and that would make a good partner for you, as well as project management is a skill that librarians will need for the future. Being able to manage not only the partners themselves in the project, but also the teams in your programs and putting that all together and what that looks like. Additionally, a skill of the future is asset mapping, figuring out not only what your library has to offer, but what your community has to offer. A great resource for tools and tips for partnering is a YALSA publication that came out this past year in 2017, and it's Partnering to Increase Your Impact. And within this tool, there's lots of resources to use, and one of them is the Community Asset Map. This can be done both for your library and for the community. The example I have filled out here is one for my library, where the boxes normally start out blank, and then you fill them in with the resources that you and or your library can provide. So under people, we have teens. I put them first because they're who are at the core of what we do. And then my title is Teen Educator Librarian. And for this particular project that I'm using as an example, we also have our Community Partnerships and Engagement Coordinator, our Technology Instructor, Reference Librarians, and Special Collection Librarians were the people that our library could bring to the project. In addition, we want to talk about resources that your library may have. And most libraries have these, but it's a way of how you pull them out and put them into your programs and add them into your partnerships. So we have a plethora of databases, Providence Journal, we have the archives that are located here within our building. We have iPads, laptops, PowerPoint, iMovie, and a curriculum we call Playlists for Learning, as well as the organizations that you work with or organizations that you would think you might want to work with in your asset map. So for the project that I'm speaking of in particular, we had a couple of organizations that serve as youth centers for summer work. And then we worked with our Rhode Island Hospitality Association, a local hotel, our local arena where concerts and basketball games and the circus and such come. And we have an organization called Leadership Rhode Island that we worked with, and Social Enterprise Greenhouse. In addition to that, I know we talked about the library not providing only space, but spaces are important. So our library in particular has a number of spaces that are available to the community and or available for us as library staff to use in order to put our programs on. And one of the more important pieces is funding. How are you going to fund your partnerships and your projects? And sometimes there's an opportunity that might be a good reason to be a partner is because you can merge funds and or your partner may have funds that are available that will help you increase your work. In our case, we happen to have an Institute of Museum and Library Services grant that has played a major role in us being able to partner out with our community. Because of the grant funds, we've been able to bring money to the table when it comes to the partnership. So this is just an example of what a library asset map might look like, and it could look very different for your own community. The project that I was speaking of that asset map was reflecting was a program that we did here in Providence called My City, My Place. And it was a summer employment opportunity for youth. And in the program, the youth were able to use their interest to guide them in their projects. So they were tasked with being able to find a point of interest throughout the city that they thought was something that they wanted to highlight. If you had a tourist that was coming to your town, where is a location that you think that they should go visit? So the teams worked in duos or teams to find locations that they wanted to highlight, and they explored the city with iPads, and they were able to take recordings of the location to create a pitch or a presentation to attract someone to their city. And this was all made possible through the partnerships that we developed. So the Rhode Island Hospitality Association was able to provide us with other partners that were able to come in and speak to the youth about how you market a location for a tourist attraction, as well as being able to expose these youth to different jobs in the hospitality and tourism field. So these are just some examples of how developing dynamic community partnerships and skills for the future what that looks like when it plays out into a program for teens. And up next, we have Mega with assessments.
All right, thank you, Shannon. All right, so last but not least is the set of skills where we are interested in demonstrating impact of our programs and services on teens. So this is the evaluation piece. And it's really, really interesting because typically librarians are really good. We are really good in telling each other, supporting each other on the impact that we are having on our youth in the community. But that is actually not enough. So we really need to be able to share our impact to the communities that we serve, right? So that's really, really important. So I guess the million-dollar question is, why is it important to know that what we have created is working? So for teens, we can measure whether or not they attain the skills that we want them to have. It also helps in terms of development of literacy. So we are talking about literacies beyond reading and writing here. So think about like some of the digital type of literacies that we are trying to foster. For teens, we can also measure the enthusiasm towards learning. So this is more sort of the interest-based learning. Rachel talked about connected learning, and one of the core principles of connected learning is learning has to be interest-driven. So how do we measure if there are any increase or decrease in interest as a result of participation in the program that we are offering? And also things that people think are kind of hard to measure, but we can actually do it. So for example, self-confidence is another thing. So these are the things that we could measure in terms of the changes that are happening with the teams that we serve. Also, it is important to know what we have created is working or not. It's really important for us, for librarians per se, and also for the libraries, for your library administrators, for example, to know. So for library and librarians, doing assessment or doing evaluation can measure the quality of delivery or suitability of the programs delivered by the library. Can also demonstrate to funders what we call as ROI, which is a return on investment. It is an increasingly popular way of making decisions. Where should funding go? So really, we can demonstrate to funders the ROI. If they invest on libraries, what does the community get? This evaluation piece can also demonstrate to the community the impact of libraries, and this is library programming and services in teams. Most importantly, with this assessment, with this evaluation piece, we can also shape policy, at the district level, at the state level, that really impacts the resources that are distributed to the library. So this is really, really important. So as you've seen, kind of the pattern that we have been approaching throughout this presentation is that we talk about past practices and then we talk about the future practices that we hope librarians will pursue. So there are two components here that I want to highlight in terms of the evaluation piece. One is assessing quality of programs. So we'll start with that first. So the past practices has always been to assess quality of programs. Library staff would gather feedback about the program based on staff feedback. So we ask each other among our team, we ask how things went. We sometimes have a checklist, so we check what happened during the program, and if we get we come up with the metrics 8 out of 9 checks, then we are all good. And then we also ask teens verbal feedback, right? And teens, as interesting as they are, sometimes it's really, really hard to get verbal feedback from them in detail, right? You get a great, or you get no, or you sometimes just get silence, right? And then the other thing that occasionally, I think a lot actually, not occasionally, but a lot of librarians actually use is attendance data. Which is good to have, but if it's not kind of synced and combined with other type of data, the meaning that attendance data has is not really solid, it's not really substantial. So in terms of practices of the future, I like to talk about this by giving you an example of something that is being actually done by the librarians at St. Paul Public Library System in Minnesota. So they actually have this team tinkering space called Career Tech. I can see the picture of the space there. They actually have this space for youth between the ages from 12 to 18 years old. And it's available in all their 5 branches in St. Paul. And what teens do at this space is they hang out, they mess around, they geek out with tools and technology to explore their passions. So they've been having this at all their 5 branches. So the way they assess the quality of their program is they use this instrument called Youth Program Quality Assessment. It's known as YPQA. Some of you may have heard about this. What's really great about this YPQA is that you can still utilize all the stuff that I mentioned earlier that you collect as past practices, like attendance data. You may do a survey with your teens that are participating, but then you combine it with YPQA. So YPQA is actually a validated instrument designed to measure the quality of youth programs, and it can also identify staff training needs. It actually has 2 pieces. One is the observations of the program using indicators that are directed by your goal. So what is your goal? You can basically create observation protocol, observation checklists based on the goals that you have. And the second part of it has what we call as the staff or administrative interviews. They use the term organizational interview, but it's essentially you're interviewing your staff, you're interviewing an administrator. So using the YPQA method, right? The St. Paul Public Library system, what they did is they set goals for CreaTech, and their goals are goals that are pretty. When you hear these goals, so for example, their goals are they want teens to overcome the fear of failures. They want teens to have sense of belonging when they are at CreaTech. They want the creative space to foster inclusion and equity. They want to focus on increasing gender representation. So specifically, they would like to have more female representation in creative. So when you hear these goals, right, these are goals that one would think is not measurable, right? How do you measure all this? But what's fascinating about YPQA is that YPQA actually allows you to measure this type of goals that one may think is hard to measure. And you can definitely not measure all that using just attendance data. And this is what makes YPQA really, really fascinating. Based on that, based on what they get, they make recommendations to improve the quality of the program. So for those of you who are interested, can look up this YPQA. But in terms of assessing quality of program, what I want to bring to your attention is the skills of the future. You heard me talk about goals, how the St. Paul Public Library system, they came together and they set up the goals that they want, the space, or the experiences that they want the teams to have, right? So the goal setting is really a skill that's really important to assess quality of the programs that you offer. And then there's the YPQA. So how do you do observation? How do you create the observation protocol? How do you do the organizational interview that I mentioned? And of course, you collect all this data. You will also have to know how to analyze the data. How do you combine that with the things that you already have, for example, like the attendance data? So these are all skills of the future. And what's fascinating about the YPQA is that if you go to the YPQA website, to develop the observation protocol or to develop the interviews, you don't actually have to start from scratch. They do have metrics that you can choose, and there will be some recommendations in terms of what you should be observing. So skills of the future in terms of assessing quality of programs, you need to know how to set goals and also do YPQA. So the other important piece when you're talking about assessment is assessing learning. So again, past practices, librarians tend to assess learning by how many people attend your program. So traditional headcount. The other thing that I often hear is time spent in the library. Circulation numbers are also very popular. And yes, these are all good numbers to have. Librarians are also asking teens through informal conversations, but it's more sort of anecdotal. We run into the same problem that I mentioned earlier, where we sometimes don't get answers from teens, right? But probably assessing learning is the hardest thing to do, right? Because really, it's whatever that's happening in their brain, right? As you're delivering these programs and services. So how do you gauge that? So there is a way actually to do that. So assessing learning practices of the future, what you see on the slide is an evaluation plan that was done by a library in Colorado called Anything Library. And I know you can't really read, but this is their evaluation plan. So basically, this Anything Library, they are really interested in providing a drop-in studio space where teens can do photography, music, graphic design, CAD, screenwriting, coding, textiles, cooking, painting, right? And the list goes on. So Anything Library really wants to offer programming for youth in what they call as 5 levels of engagement. I'm not going to go into detail what these levels of engagement are, but the goal is for youth involved in programming to reach the highest level. So these are experiences in which like teens get to participate in production-centered activities to gain mastery over maybe a particular makerspace activity, or and while they're doing this, they experience like a high level of social interaction, right? Um, so Anything Library really wants to do this, and they actually have been doing this. So the goals for the evaluation is that they want to evaluate whether teens know that the library is a place to access tools and resources to find or further develop interest. So that's their first goal. Second is they want to be able to demonstrate that teens who participate in the studio actually discover new interests, they create new products, they build next networks with their peers. So see how those are the components of the learning that we always talk about. So then they develop an evaluation plan based on the goals that they have, and then the sources for data for assessing learning. They are doing youth surveys, staff surveys. They actually use photos that they take of kids using the drop-in studio. They have something called youth talkback boards, which I'm going to briefly mention because it's pretty neat. And all the sources of data are all triangulated. Which really becomes very powerful to assess learning that happens in this drop-in studio. So I mentioned briefly about the talkback boards, and you have to, you can, just by looking at this slide, you'll see that the talkback boards actually gives teens a prompt, a very simple prompt. So here you say, today I learned, right? And as they are doing the thing in the middle of what they're doing, or towards the end, the librarian encourages them to put a sticky note on what they're learning, what they have learned, right? So, for example, like you see the first sticky note, it says how to light up a light, right? This may look really simple, but this is very, very informative in terms of gauging what they're learning, right? And you can give different types of prompts depending on the goals that you have. So take note of this simple tools like this that you can use to assess learning. So skills of the future. I just gave you an example of assessing learning. So skills of the future is being able to develop an evaluation plan. You can't just wing this thing, right? You have to develop a plan and you have to develop the instruments. But the instruments are not complex. So you can use tools like Talkback Board that I just shared with you. You can use short surveys. You can even take photos. And then you have to know how to triangulate all this to tell your library story. And that's what makes it powerful. You can, and it also not just assesses learning, but it also informs your program, and you can offer a better program based on what you learn. All right, so with that, we covered all the 4 sets of knowledge and skills that we promised we'll do. We talked about what we do in the past or currently do in reality. We talked about what is the problem that we have with these past practices. And most importantly, all 4 of us today shared with you what we should do now and what are the skill sets that a librarian should have to be able to do these future practices. One thing that I would like to say is that having all the skill sets are really great. But most importantly, librarians will need to change their mindset that they are well positioned to do everything that we have suggested here. So with that, I would like to thank all of you for being here today, for listening and watching us today. I also would like to thank the YALSA crew who invited us to give this presentation. I am mostly very, very grateful to my co-presenters today, Rachel, Jennifer, and Shannon, who are really, really amazing librarians doing amazing things at their library. So thank you for joining me today. And we have all our contact information here on the slide that you can see. And if you have any information, please contact us. If you're interested in the Youth Experience Program, please visit the website, and you can also contact me directly on more information on where you can learn such skills through this program. Thank you very much.